Welcome to the Data Center Training Video Series as part of the Illinois Kids Count Project. I'm Cassie Davis, Manager of Data and Research at the YWCA Metropolitan Chicago, and I lead the Kids Count work for Illinois. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Kids Count is a project generously funded by the Annie E. Casey Foundation in every state across the U.S. And in Illinois, YWCA Metropolitan Chicago is proud to be the Kids Count grantee. We provide timely and credible data through the data center and provide policy analysis based on evidence. And we aim to shine a spotlight on pressing issues in order to improve programs and policies for children and families across Illinois. The goal of this video series is to introduce you to the data center. We also hope that this series will both equip and empower you to understand data, access data, and use data for storytelling to advocate for children and families in your community. So let's dive in. Data can be a powerful tool in your toolbox because it can provide evidence of a problem or bring light to possible solutions, or simply data can tell us how many people live in our neighborhood. But why do we use data and how do we use it for advocacy? Let's first focus on the why. As mentioned before, data can tell us how many people live in our neighborhood, but why is that important? Well, when we have data on people in our neighborhood, we can provide goods and services such as businesses, schools, and clinics to meet the needs of our community. Data helps us drive our decision-making for how we invest in our communities, which is why it is so important to use data, especially in advocacy. Now let's focus on the how. We use data to inform others through numbers and stories. Both types of data are equally important. So how would you use data for advocacy? Going back to the goods and services example, say you provide data on the number of children in public school in your community. And you also collect stories from parents on issues facing the school, such as large classroom sizes. Both of these data points can help reveal the need for another school in your community, but because they also show evidence of a problem and they bring to light the solution needed. Data and advocacy can provide the evidence you need to create the changes in your community. Luckily, the data center is a great tool to connect you to data on your community, specifically data in the form of numbers or calculations. It should be noted here that there are limitations to the data on the data center because some data are not currently collected and some data are not publicly available. In these cases, data in the form of stories can be used to fill in data gaps. To learn more about data limitations, be sure to check out our one-pager that will be linked closely to this video. Fortunately, the data center does cover 100+ data points across the state, counties, and cities. So let's take a look at how we work with the data in the data center. The first part of working with data is to think about what data are you looking for. That may sound really simple, but I would recommend taking a moment to think through this. It's a great first step to identify the data you need since there are a lot of data out there. So perhaps you've wondered about how many children are receiving special education services in public schools by type of disability. Maybe you're interested in developing programming for students who receive special education in public schools. Or maybe you want to know about the amount of state funding for the Teen Reach After School program because you really want to advocate for more state funding in the upcoming legislative session. Or maybe you're interested in submitting a grant to provide services and support to guardians and foster care children in kinship care. All of these questions you thought about can be answered by the data center. So before we dive into the ins and outs of the data center, it's important to review the types of data you may encounter on the data center. So let's review those. On a data center, you'll find the most data is presented as counts or percentages. Another data type you'll see on the data center is a rate. So let's review these so we can be familiar with the different types of data we'll see on the data center. Account. This is a count or number of items or observations you may have. For example, we could find a count of the number of children living in poverty in Illinois for 2020. Percentages. A percent means per 100, and this represents the share of the population experiencing a situation or with a characteristic of the total population. So using our previous example, we can create a percentage of the number of children in Illinois living in poverty out of the total population of Illinois children in 2020. This would give us the percentage of children living in poverty in 2020 for Illinois. A rate is similar to percentage, but a rate is a quantity considered as a proportion of another quantity, and usually per 1,000 or more. For example, our child welfare data, a rate example would be 9.7 children were victims of substantiated cases of child abuse and neglect per 1,000 children in fiscal year 2015. These are the data types you'll likely see on the data center, and in addition, you'll also see data cover different years. Let's take a look at the differences in single year data and multiple year data so you can be familiar with that. So as mentioned, data can represent different years. On the data center, you'll find a mix of single year data, such as data representing a fiscal year or a calendar year, and you will also find multiple year average data, such as 5-year averages. Let's discuss the differences between those data year types. As mentioned previously, some data are presented for a single year, such as 1-year estimates. These data are collected over 12 months and are more current and can be useful for larger populations when you need the most recent data. These data can be unreliable, though, for smaller populations, which is why some data are presented as multiple year averages. Across the data center, you'll find the most common type of multiple year average data are 5-year averages. These are data collected over 60 months. These data are most reliable for large and small populations, but they are less current. Last but not least, I just wanted to make sure to share some data resources we commonly use on the data center. You'll see a mix of both national data sources as well as state agency resources across Illinois. And just keep in mind when working with data, it's always best practice to cite your sources. We hope this overview prepares you for using the data center. We strive to be a data resource to you and welcome your questions as you become a data expert yourself. Stay tuned for the next video in the series where we'll walk through the data center together.